You have to do it because you love it. Because mostly you're going to be sitting in a chair by yourself thinking, this doesn't make any sense, or this is really good.
Mary Camarillo's poems and short fiction have appeared in publications such as Tab Journal, 166 Poems, Sonora Review, and The Ear. Her award-winning debut novel, The Lockhart Women, was published in June of 2021, and she joins me today on Uncorking a Story to discuss her writing career and latest novel, Those People Behind Us. Welcome to Uncorking a Story, Mary.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here.
Mary, I'm happy to have you here, and I'm curious, where does your story as an author begin?
Well, I was one of those kids that you took to the library and you checked out all the books you could and read them as fast as you could and then went back for more. I've always been a voracious reader. I wrote some really awful poetry in high school. I was editor of the literary magazine, and I took some journalism classes and really thought about making a career in journalism. But I had a really sour journalism teacher that unfortunately turned me against that path. Also, another interesting thing that happened in high school is it was the 60s. And because we were unhappy with our own school newspaper, some friends and I decided we would start our own underground newspaper. Well, that didn't go well. The principal got wind of it and suggested that since I had enough units to graduate, I might as well just go ahead and do that.
Oh, no kidding. What was the name of that underground newspaper?
I don't think we got as far as having a name, but it certainly terrified the school. So yeah, he said if the newspaper came out, I'd be expelled. And I thought, okay, well, I'm pretty close to graduating, so I graduated. I went to junior college for a little bit, but I really didn't know what I wanted to do. Again, it's the 60s, so I thought I want to travel. So I saved up enough money by working random jobs to buy a rail pass and a hostel card. And I went to Europe for 3.5 months by myself. Had a great time, came home broke, thought I'm going to get some more money together and I'm going to keep traveling. So the post office was hiring. And I never intended to make a career there, but I thought I'd just work till Christmas and started working there. I know this is a roundabout way of talking about my writing career, but I'll get there. Started working there, found out there was a million stories at the post office. In fact, my first book is centered around the post office. This was a period of time when the economy was really terrible and a lot of teachers had been laid off. So sorting mail in the middle of the night, talking to teachers and all these people that were completely outside of my circle of friends and family, it was really instructive for me. So I ended up sticking around and making a career out of it. For one reason, the post office gives you 5 weeks of vacation if you hang in there long enough. And there's 10 paid holidays. I made lifelong friends. I met my husband. And I found out there was a lot of different things to do at the post office. I went from selling stamps to working in the accounting office, went back to school, got a business degree. I'm sure you're thinking, and what does this have to do with writing, Mary? Got a business degree, went up into management and finance. Then I transitioned over to the Office of Inspector General, which has oversight over the Postal Service. And I became an audit manager, and I wrote and edited thousands of audit reports for about 10 years. And because I've been a lifelong novel reader, some things struck me as similarities between audit reports and fiction. Now, I know audit reports have to be true, but I think the best fiction has to feel true as well. And the other thing about audit reports is that they have to tell you a bad thing that's happening. They have to tell you the cause of that bad thing. In other words, why. And they have to tell you the effect, like who the heck cares? And I think really good fiction is like that too. It exposes you to people that maybe you don't understand, and you want to know why they're like that, and you want to care about them. Otherwise, you'd put the book down. So when I retired, like 13 years ago, I had the idea I was going to write some family stories and started taking some writing classes and just found out that fiction is more fun to write than nonfiction and memoir because you can make stuff up. So took some writing classes at various schools around here, went to some writing conferences, just started learning the craft. And my first book, The Lockhart Women, came out in 2021 during the pandemic. The second book was kind of my pandemic project. Those People Behind Us, that was published in 2023. So it's a little over a year old now.
Yeah. Well, take me on your journey of writing that first one, because it sounds like you hadn't written like long form fiction up until that point. What was that like? What did you learn about yourself and learn about writing during the writing process for the Lockhart Women?
Well, I learned, first of all, that I'm not really a short story writer because I don't know when to end the story. So the long form really works better for me. Um, the other thing I learned is to give myself, to be patient with myself, to realize that I wasn't going to be able to rush through this. I mean, this book took 6 years to write. I didn't know where I was going. I'm not the kind of writer that writes with an outline. I'm very much by the seat of my pants, which is not very efficient. But I I find the character, and then I find another character and have the two bump up to each other, and then I start thinking what kind of trouble they can get into, and then a story comes out of it. It takes a while, and I just know that I have to be patient with myself. That eventually it's going to work out.
Yeah.
I guess I also learned there's a lot of value in other writers being part of your life and reading your stuff and giving you feedback. I've been in some really good writing groups and taken some really good classes, but you also have to learn to trust your own voice. Like you can't take everyone's suggestions for what they think is wrong or right with your piece. You have to like listen and discard those ones that don't ring true with you. And that takes a while because at first, especially when you're inexperienced and you kind of suffer from imposter syndrome like I do, because I had a degree in business, not in English. I was not a teacher. So many writers I know come from that kind of background, and that was not me. I was a business major.
Yeah.
So it took me a while to get confidence in my own voice, but that is really important.
Yeah. And I mean, feedback has its place, having somebody read your work and offering suggestions, but only you know the story that you want to tell.
Right.
And not everybody has that same context that you have in terms of what your intentions are inside there. Although, like, really good editors can help you, can help challenge you a little bit, which I
Yeah.
assume along the way you've run into an editor or two.
I've been fortunate in having some really good editors. But one of my first editors told me that no, my lead character in the Lockhart Women did not need to take off on a trip to Cuba. That was not part of the story. And I still like that story, but he was right. It wasn't. She didn't need to go there.
Yeah.
Maybe that's a short story in the future.
Yeah, that's the thing. It's like you could always save those little bits that you cut out, and you do as an author have to kill your darlings at some point, and that's a phrase that
You do. Like in my second book, I had a whole writing group that was part of the novel, which was really fun because writing groups are really fun to write about. There can be quite a bit of drama in a writing group. But a really good editor pointed out to me that doesn't really have anything to do with the story. That's not really what you're writing about. That's not what the theme is. So I always tend to overwrite. That's what I do first. But if you don't overwrite, you don't have anything to edit. So
Yeah.
I like the editing part.
Tell me about Those People Behind Us. What can you share with us about that story?
Those People Behind Us is set in the summer of 2017. So it's post Trump's first election and pre-pandemic. So it seems like a really long time ago, almost like it should be historical fiction. But it's not. It's a contemporary story about people who live in neighborhoods that are divided by politics and protest and rising housing prices, which I think is happening all over the country. It's not just in my own neighborhood. But the story is very much based in a Southern California beach town like where I live. And it's about 5 neighbors who think they don't have anything in common with each other, but it turns out they really do.
Interesting. All right. What was the inspiration behind this? I mean, was it that sort of, a walk down memory lane around 2017 when the world was about to change for so many of us. But
Um, yeah, it came from a couple of different things. I'm kind of interested in real estate agents. They're always leaving all kinds of interesting materials on your doorstep. And there was a map of our neighborhood left on our doorstep that had a calendar on the other side. And I was just really overwhelmed at how dense the neighborhood was and how many people lived here. It's just this one square, housing tract, and how few of them I know. And then things happen where you think you run into somebody at the grocery store and you don't realize that they live in your neighborhood, or maybe you go to a party and someone says, "Oh yeah, I live over there by that church." So it just started occurring to me that we're more connected than we think.
mhm.
And then during the pandemic, the gyms were closed. My husband and I are kind of gym rats, so we walked the neighborhood for exercise, and we just started making up stories about what was going on at our neighbors' houses because you really weren't talking to many people during the pandemic. So we heard somebody playing drums, and I made up a story about a drummer, a young boy playing drums. He's in the book. Our neighbors that live across the street from us at the time always left their garage door wide open, plus the door to the inside of their house, plus the door to their backyard. And they have a swimming pool. And I thought, oh, something bad has to happen there. So that's in the book. There's a couple of stories that I read in the local newspaper about my city. There was a young woman living in her car, parked right outside her parents' house because her parents wouldn't let her come in the house. And I just thought, that's such a tragic thing. So that ended up in the book too.
Wow. It's interesting, and I think this is like an author's superpower is to see these, seemingly, perhaps mundane aspects of everyday life, but then follow your curiosity down a path to
Mhm.
actually create a story from them. It's almost like seeing writing prompts wherever you go.
I
Um,
like that. Well, I think kind of having an outsider perspective is beneficial to a fiction writer. My family moved to California when I was 14 from North Carolina. And I felt very much like a fish out of water. I mean, it was the 60s and all the girls looked so cool in their mini skirts and their long straight hair. And I had like a little perm and long skirts. And I just felt like I was from outer space. So, and 14, and when I was 14, I mean, that's puberty. You're already feeling awkward and angsty anyway. So I think just having that perspective of thinking, I don't really fit in with these people, but how could I, and what makes them like they are? And I've kind of kept that perspective. My husband's family is a very large Mexican American family, completely different from my own. Very loud, and everyone talks at the same time. Where my family's very quiet and waits for you to finish speaking before they say anything. So I've kind of felt like an outsider in that family too, but it's fascinating. I mean, there's so many stories.
yeah, yeah, I'm
So
sure.
I guess being like kind of a quiet observer and an eavesdropper and a people watcher, that's really valuable for writing fiction.
Yeah. So your first book, The Lockhart Women, took 6 years to write. You mentioned it took 6 years to write.
Mhm.
And I'm just doing the math. You started those people behind us during the pandemic. It was released in 2023. So, maybe that was two and change. What changed about your approach to writing where you were able to cut out so much time? Um, spend writing that second one.
Yeah, it was a little bit longer than that because books take about a year and a half before they actually come out. you
Sure.
know, I mean, there's a lot of stuff you have to do before the book comes out, like edits and picking out your cover and all that kind of stuff. But I did have some time to work on the new book when the other book was in pre-release, which is really helpful to have another project because you kind of need to move on a little bit.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, I kind of wonder. Maybe it sounds like I'm more efficient. I'm working on a third book now, and I'm closing in on a first draft, but it's taken me about over a year.
Yeah.
So I'm not sure I'm really getting more efficient. I guess it's really more knowing that it's okay to overwrite, knowing that I'm a pretty good editor, I know how to cut things, trusting my voice. knowing when to start talking about a project. Sometimes I find that if you tell someone too much about a project in early days, it just sounds really stupid, and you think, oh no, this isn't going to work. So I've gotten smarter about not talking about it so much, you know.
Yeah. But also, I think, especially if you're a pantser, which is, I think you kind of described yourself as, it's okay to just get that first draft done, right? I mean,
Mhm.
it's like that should be the goal, not to make it perfect, because you could always go back and edit. You're always going to have a third party editor anyway looking at it as well. But it's like my message to, let's say, an aspiring author would be, hey, get that first draft done, no matter if you think it's, you know, crappy, right? Just get it done, get it out of you, and then go back and revise.
Exactly.
Because I think so many people just get hung up on trying to make it perfect, like as if the first draft is going to be what's published, and that's one of those things where nothing that resembles the first draft is going to be published. You know, it's
That's true. And I know a lot of writers from writing groups that have just spent years on the first 20 pages, you know,
yeah.
just writing it over and over again. And you think, come on, move on. What happens next?
Right, right.
Yeah,
Make sure, and maybe they don't know, or maybe they're scared to find out. Who knows?
yeah, yeah.
Um, But well, one of the things I like to do with my authors and my guests is to just understand who they are a little bit more through some pop culture questions. So, Mary, I'm curious. When you were growing up, did you have anything you liked to watch on TV? Perhaps when you were 14 and just moved to California.
My parents were super strict about how much TV we were allowed to watch. I have two brothers, and we had to decide between the three of us what those three shows were going to be. So, of course, my brothers wanted to watch combat. You know, I was really a Bonanza fan as a child. You know, I was a big Michael Landon fan. It's way before your time, I'm sure, but it was a family story about four men who was trying to, make it in the Wild West. I like that story. I thought I was being really clever when I was 14 and sneaking downstairs to where the TV was and watching Peyton Place, because I was definitely that was not one of the three shows, and my parents would have said no. You
Right.
can't watch that. It's not. But then my mother told me years later, yeah, I knew you were watching that.
No, I remember Bonanza. I mean, I watched it in syndication, but I was also a big Michael Landon fan.
Mhm.
Growing up, one of the shows that we were allowed to watch was Highway to Heaven, and that
Oh,
was one
okay.
of his bigger shows in the early to mid '80s, maybe. And that's how I knew him. And then I remember, then we were watching Bonanza and saw him in reruns of that as well. I'm more curious about music because you mentioned kind of coming of age in the '60s. What
Mhm.
were you listening to back then?
Um, I had a little tiny transistor radio that I kept glued to my ear all the time. One of my big thrills when we moved to California was I got to see the Beatles at the Hollywood Bowl. I mean,
Oh
I'm
wow.
sorry, at Dodger Stadium. Dodger Stadium. We sat way up in the top seats, which cost like $3.50 a piece. The show lasted a half an hour, and there was a bunch of opening acts, but the Beatles only played for about a half an hour. And I found myself screaming my head off, and I didn't know why. And my brother went with me, and he thought there was something wrong with me. It was very puzzling. It was very emotional, but super exciting.
Could you even hear them over the sound of everybody
No.
screaming? That's what I heard. Like I remember when they played Shea Stadium, and I've interviewed people who have been to like those early shows. They're like, we couldn't even hear anything coming out of their instruments or singing because
I
we
think
were
this
all
might have
screaming.
been their second to the last concert, because I think they were just done with it by then. Because after that, they were sick of it. I mean, they couldn't
Yeah.
hear each other. I'm sure it was really frustrating for them. But yeah, I'm a lifelong concert goer. I love going to live music, pretty much any kind.
Did you see the Bob Dylan biopic?
I did,
What did
yeah.
you think of it?
I thought it was fantastic. I mean, I know there's some historical inaccuracies, but it's a movie. They can't put every single thing in it. I thought Timothy Chalamet did a really good job of channeling Dylan without imitating him too much. Um, the Joan Baez character, she was terrific. It's phenomenal. They all did their own singing and instrument playing. So
Yeah,
yeah,
no, I thought it
I
was like
loved it.
we just saw it this weekend, and I was just blown away. I mean, I've loved Dylan's music, and I think they captured him really well. I
For
think
someone that does not want to be captured, right?
yeah, yeah. My wife is like, "Do you think they ran this movie by him?" I'm like, "They may have tried,
No,
but
actually, I've listened to some interviews. He read the whole script aloud to the director
oh, really?
and didn't really give a lot of commentary, but the director got to hear his voice reading the lines.
Yeah,
So I think that really was instructive for him. But yeah, it's not like he really approved it, but he was involved in it. So
no. Well, that's good to know. Yeah, but I was in tears in parts of that film. I thought it was just so beautifully done. I mean, just his Chalamet's performance was. You said channeling Dylan. I think that's the right word, right? He was.
yeah,
It was great. It was great to hear those, just that music, and I kept whispering to my wife, I'm like, "Hey, just wait till what happens at the Newport Folk Festival," because she doesn't really know anything about his story or his life, and I'm like, she's like, "What are
yeah.
you talking about?" I'm like, "Just wait, it's gonna be bad." But very cool.
Yeah.
What if you had an aspiring author come to you and say, "Mary, I want to do what you've done. I want to publish a book." What kind of words of advice would you give that aspiring author?
Well, you have to be persistent. You have to be somewhat audacious. You have to realize, I don't know, there's some horrible statistic like 2 million books come out a day or something. I mean, it's, I almost have to say too, you can't necessarily expect that you're going to make a living at this because it is so competitive.
Yeah.
You have to do it because you love it. Because mostly you're going to be sitting in a chair by yourself thinking, this doesn't make any sense, or this is really good, or it doesn't make any sense, or it's really good.
Right.
It's a very solitary thing, so it's great to have other writer friends that can listen to you and commiserate with you. So yeah, you need to get a writing community. I think you need to be a fan of independent bookstores, get to know the owners. They can be really generous when you have a book come out. They'll let you do readings and they'll carry your book for you. I think you have to learn how to edit. You have to realize that when you revise something, you could go back and do it over again. It doesn't mean you've carved it in stone.
Yeah.
If it doesn't work, you just can start over again. So I would say
Yeah.
don't be afraid to revise.
Yeah. And then, I think that point of, don't expect to get rich doing this is probably a good thing to
Yeah,
to think about. Don't do it for the money, do it for the love of doing it, do it for the love of
exactly.
the process and wanting to get this story out. Um, Now it's a similar question, but now directed towards you. If you could whisper some words of advice into your younger self's ear, what would you tell the younger Mary?
I wish I would have stuck with journalism. That's one thing I would say. Don't let one sour teacher change your idea of what you want to do with yourself. That's pretty foolish. To a younger Mary who is thinking about writing, I would say you also have to publicize your book. You have to talk about it. I think with my first book, I figured I wrote it. I would just give it to people. They would tell me what it was about. I wouldn't have to do elevator pitches or sell it or talk about themes or summary. I just figured, well, I wrote it. Here it is. There's a lot of stuff you have to do that's been outside of my wheelhouse that I've gotten more comfortable at.
Yeah.
Being on panels, talking to people I don't know, going to book festivals and trying to, get people to come and talk to you and try to sell them a book. It's if you're introverted, it takes some getting used to.
Yeah, no, absolutely. A lot of people tell me that, they think that writing the story is the hard part, only to realize that no, that's really the only fun part of the process. Like the other stuff, you're trying to sell it and pitch it and
Yeah.
do all the publicity for it is a little bit more challenging, and it is something that you do have to become comfortable with, because if you can't, fight for your book or stand up for it or try and sell it, why would anybody else do that? Um,
Yeah. Unless you're some really lucky person who gets a big publisher and a big publicity, campaign money, then yeah, you have to do it yourself.
Yeah. Yeah, and most first-time authors won't get that, even if they go with one of the big publishing houses,
This is true.
because
Yeah.
those dollars are set aside for James Patterson and Stephen King and Dean Koontz and and a whole bunch of other people who, Mary Higgins Clark. So, Mary, do you have any social media or a website that you could share if people wanted to get to know you a little bit more?
Sure. I have a website that's marycamarillo.com. I have a newsletter on Substack that's called Life with Riley. It's Riley's my 16-pound flame point Siamese cat, who I feature on Instagram pretty heavily because he's pretty good at posing with books. So I'm on Instagram, and then I'm on Facebook as Mary Camarillo too. So yeah.
Very cool. I'll be sure to put all that in our show notes so people can find you easily.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
Mary, I'll say thank you for stopping by Uncorking a Story and letting me uncork yours.
Thank you. It was fun talking to you.
Thanks for listening to Uncorking a Story. If you'd like more information about today's guest or to find out more about Mike, go to uncorkingastory.com. If you enjoyed the show, please subscribe, rate, and review us at Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. Tune in every week to hear Mike Carlin uncork a new story.